Education Week, sponsored by Tennessee's Textbook Affordability Task Force. And so welcome. Today you're going to be hearing from 8 teams of Tennessee Community College project teams that are engaged in OER development. I'm only going to take just a few seconds here to transition into our first presenter, Chattanooga State Community College, with a session titled Making Anatomy and Physiology Accessible with OER. And the presenter and team lead is Michael Anderson. So I will unshare. Professor Anderson, you are welcome to go.
Hey everyone, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Den. So this is a series of quick hit presentations. I will make mine as succinct as possible, but I'm going to take you, as I pull up my screen, talk about a little bit about OER in the context of challenges that relate to anatomy and physiology students. And of course, a lot of this is relevant to any student base, but my experience with teaching anatomy and physiology compared to other courses that I've taught is that these students are about as cutthroat as possible. And the reason being is they're usually applying for the same programs at the same school. So everyone is in this weird balance between being friends and competitors, and half enemies, in a good way, I guess, if that makes any sense. But let's go ahead and get into it. And I'm going to talk about 3 different things today, and as quick as possible. The first is going to be the student needs and challenges, like I mentioned, with A&P students. And then my plan and what I'm doing, and something to consider when adopting an OER strategy for a science course or any course in general. Right? So with anatomy and physiology students, like I said, they're a bit cutthroat, and unfortunately that means that if there is the slightest thing that they don't understand or they feel that they're not getting, they will bring it to your attention. And even though I think there is a degree of self-sufficiency that A&P students and students in general should have, that doesn't always come through to the level that you want. So a big thing, I have 3 things that we want to consider here. The first one is, with your courses and OER especially, scaffolding is super important. You're in charge of choosing your materials and formatting your materials or creating your materials. And there is often a lack of external support like you might get with the publishers. So it is critically important that you pace your course and develop your materials with a sort of progression in mind. And students should be taught how to walk before they run. You really want to encourage independence over time. They don't have the McGraw-Hill hotline. There aren't as many concentrated materials as they might get with one publisher's courseware package. So, start off easy and progress to more difficult things. And likewise, with your instructions, maybe at the beginning of the semester, make them quite a bit more detailed, provide alternative instructions, so text, images, maybe videos or voice files, so that students start off on a good footing. And I think there is sort of a rose-colored glasses effect that we all have when we're designing our curriculum, especially if you're totally in charge of choosing the materials, where you sort of tie your ego into it and everything is great and perfect and the students should understand everything and love everything. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes they do, but they might need a little bit of help, and things that you assume that they know or will be able to figure out aren't always as clear as what you're seeing, right? And a big thing with anything, and I will say that the context of my presentation does apply to online courses as well as on-ground courses, but we are all within the COVID times right now, so a lot of these things deal with online support for students as well. And it's super critical to communicate often and in a variety of ways with students, sort of in the same vein as not having these external or third-party hotlines for students to get help. You're the one, right? You're choosing materials. Sometimes the materials don't work. Sometimes they're not permanent and you have dead links. You need to figure that out on the front end. And if it is a problem with students, you need to help them figure that out. And then, of course, include alternative strategies. And this is, I know everyone here is probably very familiar with OER at this point, but one of the things that OER affords us is the flexibility to try different things and choose different things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And sometimes you don't expect them to not work. And when they do, you need to think of ways to help the one or two students that are really struggling with your specific choice of materials, right? So there should be some sort of flexibility and say accommodation built into your course. Right, so that's the first student needs. The second one is students need a solid foundation. So with anatomy and physiology, like a lot of other science courses, or really most other courses, there are there are national standards that students need to meet in terms of what they're learning. So this applies to your learning outcomes and objectives and the things that you should be choosing. The nice thing with publishers is they lay them out for you. They usually have their own set of learning objectives and materials that all apply to the learning objectives. And when you're switching to OER, sometimes you don't get that. And of course, with OpenStax books and some other open textbooks, they do have a set of learning objectives and outcomes, but it's always nice to go to the literature, see what's modern, see what's currently accepted and what's important, whether it's in the published literature or some sort of society outlined newsletter or published list, right? Students need to learn what they need to learn, right? And the last thing to consider is with an OER course, sometimes it is, well, not sometimes, it is a lot of grunt work trying to find the materials that fit your needs and to fit the content that you're teaching. And if you stick strictly to open educational resources, sometimes the materials are lacking. And this is aside from the fact that you may have to not just curate materials, but create materials as well. So I often ask this question when I'm developing this OER course: am I restricted to only these materials? And no, you're not. There are a lot of great materials out there to engage students and to keep them engaged with the learning materials and the content. And just because we're developing OER courses doesn't mean we have to eschew all these materials. I think one of the things that is nice with TBR's initiative is we're providing, at least in my context, I'm providing an OER framework for this anatomy and physiology course. So anyone that takes this course can pick and choose materials as they want. But there are plenty of things, and we're at this great connectivist point in time where there's so much out there and students are finding it. You should find it as well and provide it to students. And so all these great things, Purpose Games, Jeopardy Labs, that are engaging materials that we can use aren't strictly OER, but you can certainly implement them within your OER framework. So now I want to talk about what I'm doing specifically in my anatomy and physiology courses. One of the challenges with A&P is trying to find a way, especially online, to keep students engaged with the materials. It's pretty rigorous. The content is like learning a second language. If they're not familiar with the language of anatomy, it's very, very challenging. So trying to find ways to keep student spirits high and keep them interacting with the materials is a challenge, especially with labs. So I'm going to leave the safety of my PowerPoint for just a second and switch over to, I just want to show you my real quick hit of my lecture and lab materials, and I just have a few minutes left. I'll do this quickly if anyone's watching the clock. So what I'm doing in lecture is I'm importing a lot of the OpenStax material into a RISE 360 module, and each one's broken down into subunits divided by the specific learning outcomes within my larger unit. So this is just one, and it's an example of something that you can do to ensure that students are engaged and they're interacting with the material. It's more than just presenting an open textbook. It's taking the textbook, integrating all these other resources, and making it convenient and interactive for the students. So as they're reading through this textbook content, I have the flexibility to copy and paste, modify as needed, and then reorganize as needed as well with OER images, with textbook images and other sources that I find. And along with this, you can embed videos. So you're really making it a one-stop shop for the students. And as they go through the course materials, they have all these different forms of media that they can use to support their learning. And even flashcards and these quick hit objective ways to study. But you can find a lot of different things. There are games that you can incorporate. This is an awesome game dealing with diffusion and the principles of diffusion. It's way more interesting than, and I'm biased because I like reading about this stuff, but students might not feel the same way as me. So if they can play a game while they're reading about the material and not have to search it out on their own, or even go to a different location, that's going to help them better understand the material, right? So, this is just something what I'm doing, and along the way when I'm presenting some of this stuff, I'll have knowledge check questions. One, to make sure that they're paying attention, but also just to give them sometimes a confidence boost where they answer an easier question, but also gives them an opportunity to communicate with me and their other students and form sort of a community of inquiry as we're all going through this adventure together, right? So that's sort of my, that is my lecture structure, or my lecture material structure. Lab is sort of the same thing. I'm using a hyperdoc formats where students have, again, convenience and interactivity, where they have all these resources in hand that would simulate an online lab. And of course, there are certain things that OER doesn't offer, like really advanced three-dimensional dissections, virtual dissections, and things like that. But you can find other ways to replace that material, and I think the learning is equivalent, right? So something like this, where I include a lot of videos and hyperlinks, and then things within the textbook where they have just this central, not really worksheet, but something that they can interact with and use as a study guide in the future. And then what I like to do at the very end of these activities, as we're going through this together, and I'm assisting them, but ultimately it's sort of a student-led session that I have with them. But by the end of lab, we would fill this out and students could use this to study for the quizzes and exams. And after lab, this is when the burden is on the students to complete a couple of follow-up activities that let them further engage with the materials. So they have things like I showed you before, Jeopardy labs, where they'd have to go in and create their own study guides, or they create their own practice tests, or things that they're using modern technologies like social media and other sorts of YouTube, Instagram, things like that are relevant to studying. They just might not know it. And this is harkening back to the idea of scaffolding and providing instructions and being clear with your intentions and how you are and why you are presenting certain materials. And along with that, constantly telling the students about the benefits, and then a little bit of hoping that they are receptive to that and they don't think that you're just playing a role, right? It's ultimately about the student. So I have one more slide in my PowerPoint I'm going to switch back to, and this is one thing to consider if you're developing an OER course. It's all about a formative approach. At least for me, I'm in the, with a lot of these, my fellow grant recipients, I'm in one of the more unique contexts of developing this course as a pilot, or developing this course and piloting it at the same time, which is great for me because I get to try out all these things in a pretty fast succession. And what doesn't work, I get immediate feedback from my students, and I don't have to plan and revise without knowing how the students are going to receive this stuff. So I have 3 R's here: review, reflection, and revision. Take some time to review the materials yourself. Have the students reflect on the materials and their experiences with them, and then provide feedback and let go of your ego. If something doesn't work and you love it, well, the students don't love it, it's not good for them. Change it, modify it as needed. And that's about all I want to say. I know I'm right at my 13 minute time limit. So if any of you have any questions, I'm happy to field them, but thank you for listening to me. And this is a great project. It's fun. I think it's great for society and students, and I'm really excited to be a part of this initiative.
Oh, thank you, Michael. This is Robert again, your moderator. We do have time. We have 1 minute. If you have a question for Professor Anderson on this session, please put it in the chat, and I'll be glad to relay that to him. Any questions in the chat? We have time for one.
Oh, well, I just opened up the chat and I see that you couldn't see my non-PowerPoint materials. I am so sorry about that. I was in the zone and didn't even notice. Hopefully my text was my speech was good enough. Yes, I will provide links to all of these. I'm not sure I can send them to Dr. Den. I'm not sure if I can.
Yes,
I'll
and
throw them in the chat.
our
Actually, I have some.
organizer, Rachel Fleming, will be
Okay,
able to facilitate that for us, I'm sure. We're right on schedule. Thank you very much, Michael. Our
excellent. Thank you.
next presenter is from Southwest Tennessee Community College with a session titled Ensuring Equity and Inclusion in OER Material. And the presenter and team lead is Marcia Hunter. So Marcia, it's all yours.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, how are you? Okay, so I am presenting on ensuring equity and inclusion in OER. And on my next slide, it talks about, what equity is. So equity is described as fairness, sameness, and valuing diversity and inclusion. A lot of times, we talk about equity and we look at diversity and sometimes fairness. We think of fairness, but we're not necessarily thinking of sameness. So I'm sure we have mostly seen the picture that's depicted on the screen. We have children who are looking over the fence. But here it is, that's fairness. Everybody is brought to the fence, but not everybody can see over the fence. That's equality. It doesn't have fairness because everybody can't see over the fence. It has some degree of sameness in that everybody comes there, but everybody really can't learn from what is on the next side. And of course, diversity is not taken care of at all, because here it is, the person in the wheelchair has no say so in terms of what is going on. So that's what we are looking at as we prepare our material in OER. Are we making sure that the material depicts these? Are we looking to make sure that there's fairness in the material, there's sameness, there's value, there's diversity, and there's inclusion? A lot of times when we get the traditional textbooks, we are not satisfied that there is the level of diversity that we want and the level of inclusion. But now we get an opportunity to do that. How do you do that? Do you as a professor make sure that there is sameness, fairness, and value and inclusion and diversity? Or is this the time that we allow students to be able to help provide that by giving assignments that allow the student to go and find something that student think is more fair to him or her? Because we can only generalize, but the student might know better, and so we might be able to give that opportunity. If we look at the other slide, we're looking at inclusion, and inclusion is usually described as an environment in which all students are treated respectfully, fairly, and have equal access to the resources and opportunities, and each can contribute. If you notice the picture on there, we see different aspects. We see thinking styles, language, perspective, sexual orientation, job level, okay? So we are seeing that there is diversity there, but let's look. Is every piece of the puzzle respected? It appears that way to me because they're all joined. They all are able to participate and engage. And so we would probably want to say it's done in a fair manner, as opposed to the other picture that we saw. They have equal access. How do we know they have equal access? Because they're touching. There's no gap between. So everybody is learning and have equal access and opportunities for them to contribute. Now, doesn't mean that everybody is going to contribute, but everybody has the opportunity to contribute. When we look at that, we have to look at our material. Are we providing that environment through the material and through our own teaching styles? Are we providing an environment that is respectful? You know, I've heard jokes outside classroom, in businesses, on the street, where you look at someone and you have your own biases, and so you begin to predict what is going to happen in that person's life. In fact, I was watching a video preparing for my OER class, and this African-American lady, her child, 5 years old, asked her, they were journeying, and so he asked her if an African-American man that came close to them, if he was going to rob them. Now, you would think as an African-American child, he probably would not have asked that. But of course, why not? He sees that on television all the time. Is he feeling respectful? Is he being respectful of others? Does he feel that respect for himself? How do we as faculty depict that in the classroom? How do we as faculty, how does the material we use depict that? Do we see, you know, just one person of diverse orientation with in multiple of pages? You know, you have to go 20 pages before you see that. So we have an opportunity here to make sure that there is total inclusion, which brings the respect and fairness and equal access, and of course, opportunities that we can fully contribute. And then when we look at the next area, we are talking about what are some ways, but sure ways you can include equity and inclusion in the classroom and in OER material. Self-awareness. So our first speaker talked a little about that we should review, reflect, and revise. That's not just with the material. We should give opportunities to students or provide material that will give opportunities to students to review, reflect, and revise their own awareness. That young man, the story I just told that I read, had a chance to reflect and to say, you know, where did I get that information from? And what does that speak to in terms of myself and others? As faculty members, when we go into the classroom, are we doing that kind of reflection? Now that we have a material that we are choosing, and, you know, my team are pushing for not only our choice, but students' choice. So the students get to choose some of the material. They may add to what we have already chosen, but at least they get to participate in that. Are we giving them an opportunity for their self-awareness? And are we taking time to do that? What about culturally relevant teaching? It's, you know, you probably hear that a lot now, but what does that mean to you? Do you know that whether you have a cultural lens? Have you talked about that? Have you thought about that? What is your cultural lens? When you see someone coming down the street, do you have a preconceived idea of what that person should do, what that person should be thinking? Are you thinking, do you think differently from that person? So we have to reflect, and we have to ask our students to reflect on these. What about your view of diversity? Do you view cultural diversity as something that's important? Is it just that we put some material together, but our actions don't depict that? We have to be careful in that regard. Oftentimes in the business world, you might hear about culture fit. Even in our schools, you hear about culture fit. This person doesn't really fit in with the class. What is culture fit? Is it culture fit or culture advantage? That person can, if taught and provided opportunity, can use his or her misfit to become an advantage by sharing, by allowing other people to see how he or she lives. Even when we do or Teams and Zoom classes, are we requiring all our students to turn on their camera? How do we know they are comfortable doing that? Is that a culture fit when we do that? So we have to take into consideration all of that and talk more about culture advantage. Let people feel good about their culture and what that culture brings to play. Find material that looks at various culture as an advantage instead of a disadvantage. Engagement. Engagement is very important in learning, in retention, in graduation. As we look at our material, does the material we are using lend to engagement? Here it is, we have OER material that we're choosing. We ought to choose material that lend to engagement. And we ought to utilize that material to provide engagement. The former presenter talks about scaffolding. You know, oftentimes, I think sometimes we think that we are providing too much scaffold for our students. One of the things that I've been doing recently, it's talking to college and university professors from different colleges, just to find how much help do you give your student? And I'm finding that a lot of the colleges that we consider more elite colleges, once they accept these students, they work to make sure they keep them. Probably so because they are culture fit. But what about if they are not quote culture fit and they are culture advantage, so that we need to learn from their culture? Are we working to make sure that they are kept engaged and provided with scaffold so that they will be retained and graduate? Is retention and graduation a part of the outcome that we are working for in the classroom? Do we think about that? Do we think of only doing the learning objectives and not the graduation objective and the employment objective? Once that student has graduated from our program, are we providing instruction and instructional material that will enhance in the workplace? And then let's look at mindset. You know, mindset is one of the concepts that are widely used: growth mindset, fixed mindset. We are teaching these concepts, but have we done an evaluation of our own selves? Are we finding material that lends to open mindset? If our mindset is fixed, if we see students as that one is not going to do very well, then that's a fixed mindset. I was in a discussion once in which someone asked, and it was not, you know, in the classroom or anything of the sort, but someone asked about having quotas for A's and B's and C's. Is that saying that they're a fixed mindset? Do you ever think that all your students could make an A in a class? Do we teach in such a way that all students could fairly make an A.
Marcia, this is Robert. We're almost out of time.
Okay.
I know you have some very other great things to tell everyone here, but it's my job to make sure we stay on track. I'm sure everyone's just very interested.
Okay.
I'm sorry that you didn't get to finish, but if folks have questions for you, they can put it in the chat, and you're welcome to talk offline.
Okay, so the last one is, can students see themselves in the material, and can students learn about themselves through the material? It's great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. The next team is from Roane State Community College with a session titled Breaking Down Barriers, Opening the Doors to Education. This is a large team. The co-leaders of this team are Professor Jillian Miller and Professor Stephanie Holmes. So I'll let the leaders take over from here. And make sure you are unmuted.
Thank you. Just verifying you guys can all see the presentation right now. Is that true?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super. All right, so thank you, Dr. Den, for that introduction. We'll just go ahead and get started so that we make sure we have enough time, because as everybody else has already noted, there's a lot to share. So we are a team from Roane State that's working on our Math 1010 Math for General Studies course. And this is kind of a survey math course where they hit several different topics, including some algebra concepts, some geometry concepts, some stats concepts. And we noticed through the data that a lot of students, especially our Pell eligible students, weren't succeeding at the same rate as everybody else. And so we wanted to address this. What we did first was a needs assessment, just kind of looking at the course and saying, okay, what is it that that we need in this course? And what we noted was that the course was being taught differently every single time, because there wasn't a set curriculum. Every instructor decided the curriculum when they taught it. And so students weren't getting this consistent experience through the Math 1010 course. While they did have a common textbook, every instructor used the same textbook, and they used My Math Lab to be able to do the homework. The text that they used really didn't cover all of the material, and so they found that each instructor had to supplement the text with their own materials. And again, this kind of speaks to students all getting a different experience. And so with those things in mind, we wanted to make sure that we started by addressing those things and then, you know, kind of building on that. So the first thing that we did is we looked at the curriculum. And the curriculum then, of course, allowed us to choose a textbook. So with the curriculum, we split it up into really 4 main units, that being algebra, geometry, stats, right? Hitting all that main stuff. And then we added kind of this capstone project, which can go throughout the semester or can be contained, you know, in the last few weeks. So that was the first thing that we did. After choosing the curriculum, that kind of led us to a particular textbook, and in this case, 2 textbooks actually. Because these textbooks are free, we have now the opportunity to ask students to use 2 different textbooks. We link to them, of course, so they won't be, you know, skipping around everywhere trying to find out where they're looking. But now we have the freedom to choose 2 textbooks which do cover all of the material, and that's something that we couldn't have done with the previous textbook or with a textbook that costs money, because as you guys know, students already pay out a lot, and asking them to buy another book we didn't think was fair. So so it led us to our textbooks, and to supplement my, to replace My Math Lab, we are choosing to use My Open Math. We found that this has a lot of the same capabilities as My Math Lab, but is in some cases more customizable. So that was nice. And then after choosing the textbook, we decided to tackle some common resources that would be available for instructors, but that wouldn't be required. So these are resources that are already out there in the OER world that we are adapting, or some of them are things that we are creating. And again, these will be available so that instructors can use them as is or adapt them if they don't like them as they are. And then we don't want to require them because we still, we're big believers in autonomy in teaching. So we won't require them, but they'll be there so that instructors won't have to go searching for things. Among these resources are collaborative activities, as well as, like I said, that capstone project. And of course, both of these are HIT practices. So, so we're kind of touching on that as well.
Okay, so one of the things we put part of our focus on is, as a number of our faculty are already using OER materials, but to break it out to a wider expanse, we want to make sure that the faculty were aware of the benefits that incorporating OER into their classroom would look like for them. So we're preparing several different trainings and even some PSA style videos that would share with them the advantages for them as well as for the students. So looking at flexibility, how they can tailor the materials to their needs, because I think we all have gotten a textbook that, you know, does a fairly good job, but we wish it had this chapter, or wish it had that chapter. So the ability to pull in the materials and really tailor it to what their classroom might need at that time. So a certain component of differentiation as well. And then timely updates.
Yeah, and I'll speak briefly to the student side. As you can see on the screen, that one of the biggest benefits, and probably the #1 thing on the student's mind, is cost savings. So a lot of anxiety is based around that. Can I afford the book, or can I skim through the class without the book? And no, you can't and shouldn't. Equitable access, everyone having the same material on the first day of class is huge. Definitely promotes student success and retention. But again, that also alleviates that anxiety as well when you don't begin the course with a deficit. As Misty said, the textbook is tailored to learning outcomes, which is essential. The inclusion of interactive and diverse material enriches the student experience. Getting multiple perspectives is great. And also just it can help with the interactiveness can help with different learning modalities as well. Permanent and perpetual access to material promotes lifelong learning. As we all know, when you return a rented textbook, you no longer have access to that material. So you cannot go back and refer to anything at that point except your own notes that you've taken. And sad, but sometimes the case is instructors every now and then will require materials and never use them. So that leads to great frustration for students.
And if I could circle back for just a second, the timely update feature too for the professors, because you know how when you get your course put in place and it's working well for you, and then your department adopts a new textbook and you really have to do an overhaul of your course, one of the benefits that we're promoting to our faculty is that once they have their course in place, then yes, like any course would have occur, you would tweak it from semester to semester, but there would not be that overall redo they would have to do with the adoption of a new textbook.
Sorry guys, I can't actually get my video to show up again.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay.
Let's see.
You're okay. Sorry, I don't know what just happened, but we are back.
And there is a question in the chat, Jessica, maybe if you want to address that while we continue on. So
There you go.
There are lots of perceived barriers to OER, and this slide shows some of them. It's a little bit older, but if you guys, in the chat, please feel free to add any that you can think of. And, I have heard all of these, and You know, I have responses for most of them. Difficult to find what I need. Yes, sometimes that can be true. But, you know, just like with any search engines, you learn which resources have what you need. You learn how to conduct better searches. It becomes easier the more you practice. So, you know, pretty much any of these can be addressed if you stop and think about it a little bit. So can anybody think of any others possibly?
I think we spoke about the time that it would take to look up and vet materials. And we have been talking about working with our learning center and possibly incorporating some of our tutors in their downtime, taking the curriculum and looking for materials for our faculty and vetting that in advance of them adapting it into their course.
Yes, and someone just put in the chat that time is an issue. And yes, that is the biggest one. But here's how you address that issue. You don't have to go whole hog and change your course all at once. You don't have to switch everything to OER. Incorporate one activity every semester. Switch one thing up every semester. You know, you don't have to do it all at once. It can be a gradual switch over.
I think too, Stephanie and I did this presentation last week and actually did a poll to see, of course, we used these options when we did our poll, and difficult to find what I need was actually number one with those that were participating in our presentation as well. So it's still something that you guys kind of perceive as a barrier. And I think Stephanie would agree and our team would agree. It is easy to kind of get behind and stuck, you know, trying to find what you're looking for, but you will find that the more you do it, the more the easier it will become to find what you're looking for. You'll find certain sites that will help you the most, and those will be your go-tos. So.
Hey, and Brad Fox here. Hello, everyone. I'll be very quick. So stepping back from the Math 1010 class, what we're now also looking at doing is how do we build acceptance of OER at Roane State? And so a framework that we're using is Gleicher's formula for change. I mean, the realization is that there are a couple of things that are consistent. One is that change is inevitable. And secondly, that there's going to be resistance to change, even if it's something that's really good. If it's a change that requires you to do something differently, it's going to be resisted. So recognizing that at Roane State, what we're looking at is using this formula and identifying that, okay, there needs to be some level of dissatisfaction. And I think from the student perspective, there's dissatisfaction in terms of cost of books, availability of books. And from the faculty perspective, there is dissatisfaction in the desire to want to do things better for the students. For this to happen, you need to have a vision. So we need to have a vision of how, you know, life after OER is going to benefit faculty, it's going to benefit students, and then you need to have specific next steps so that you can move forward with the process. If you have all of those, and the math faculty can tell me if any of those are zero, what happens to the equation? It doesn't overcome resistance. And so you're not going to make the inroads in getting OER acceptance. So our next slide, part of the process that we're using to build awareness for OER is we've divided ourselves into two teams. One focusing on what can we do to improve student acceptance and what we can do to improve faculty acceptance. I'm not going to go through there because we're not going to have time. So I'll just let you look at those. I think they're pretty straightforward, and then move on to the next slide.
All right, and just finishing up, this is just addressing each of those concerns, each of those big concerns, and a lot of the concerns also that you guys have in the chat. If you're having trouble finding the time to find resources, talk to your local librarian. I've just realized how fruitful this is. It's such a wonderful conversation, and they can help you find so much. Your tutors, your learning center, they can also help you find things and help you vet them to make sure that they're of the quality that you're looking for, and help to make sure that things are up to date. And then of course, please, offer some sort of professional development, some sort of professional learning for your faculty, and help them to recognize what's out there, how they can find it, and how they can implement it in their classroom.
Well, thank you all very much to the Rhone State team. Very thorough, and I'm glad you did mention the librarians to give them a shout out because they are an invaluable resource for both faculty and students. So thank you very much for being aware of the time. We'll move right into our next team, which is from Nashville State Community College. The Nashville State Community College project lead and presenter today is Robert Ladd, and the title is OER and UDL, an opportunity for deconstruction. So Professor Ladd, you're on.
Thank you for that. Also give a shout out to my librarian. She has been working with me specifically and directly with my OER as I create information. So they are definitely invaluable. And mine's a little bit different because we're a little bit earlier in our adoption process of OER, but I do also have the unique capability of working inside of a teaching center as well as being part of the OER process. So as we've been adapting OER, we've had a lot of great opportunities provided through the TBR grant to do other professional development as well, including UDL. And I've been able to, as someone in our teaching center, to take some of those concepts into our teaching center and apply them and help other instructors apply them right now in real time, even as we're developing the OER. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit and what that looks like and some of the takeaways that we were able to get from the very get-go, even though our pilot courses are still in construction. So I'm not going to read this whole thing because I know that we're a little strapped for time. But this is from the UDL webpage. This is from their UDL guidelines, and anyone can look that up. This is just the information from there. I bolded the specific things that I wanted to highlight here, and that's the focus on underlying structure, highlighting structural relations, and making them more explicit. Those are the specific aspects of this UDL section that I was going to focus on. And what I found from that was that framing really does matter. And specifically what we were looking at here is just our basic course shell and design, which I found some interesting concepts that apply here as far as UDL is concerned. One other thing that I do want to touch on is that the principle that underlines these changes I'm going to be talking about is called the extrinsic goal gradient. And that goal gradient suggests that people work harder to achieve a goal when they feel like they're closer to it, which I think we can probably all recognize and agree with. Too many acronyms. Yeah. And so what I found was this: if your course shell looks anything like mine used to, so this is definitely not me calling anyone else, this is literally my old course shell, it probably looked like this, where each item that's being graded is being presented discretely. And what I mean by that is as an individual item all by itself. And this is my grade book within Brightspace, in case you're using something different like Canvas. But then I took this idea of UDL and the goal gradient and thought, okay, how can I fix this very basic thing that's being presented to students and use it as a way of motivating them? And what I came up with was this. These are the exact same assignments. These are the exact same procedures and the same process that we're going through to create that final paper. But what I did do is I organized it differently. And I put the final essay, or for the first essay, I created an entire category for it. And then as they work through some of that formative assessment, they're still getting the same points, but under the structure of this, they are getting that feeling that they are halfway to the final to the main goal, if you will, to that final product, rather than brainstorming being one thing, drafting being one thing, summary being another, and them all being presented separately. This is highlighting the fact that, of course, all of these little pieces are working together to create one item, and that's our final essay. I have worked with other people in different fields and different disciplines as well. And so this wasn't, again, this was not just for me. This is something that we presented and worked on through our teaching center. So I have had the opportunity to apply this concept to different courses as well, not just the English essay, as it were. Also, down there at the bottom, like to include some wording and verbiage from Bloom's taxonomy to help with the understanding what that process is and what I'm expecting the students to do, and what level of Bloom's taxonomy that is engaging with. So what I found in relation to that is it does definitely help with the motivation. Students are a lot more likely to finish that essay when they think they're halfway through with it already. And again, that's just a mindset change, or acknowledging what work feels like for the students, not just what we know it is like. And then that moved me a little bit further to asking the question about how we can leverage student metacognition to improve that perseverance and retention, to take that thing that we're working on with the goal gradient and extend it even further. And actually, one of our other presenters already talked about this a little bit when talking about equity and equality, and how we connect those and deconstruct the classroom and allow people to feel culturally significant. And what I realized I needed to do was I needed to make these connections a little bit more explicit, and realize where realistically I fit in their goals. My class is a mid-level goal. It's not their ultimate goal. And I needed to realize that as the instructor as well. So what I wanted to do for the student was to make those connections more explicit. So this is something that we're actively doing as we're building our OER courses, but it's also something that we've been able to implement in real time currently. So just a brief definition here, in case you hadn't heard it already. This is from Angela Duckworth's book on grit. And that is, grit is passion and perseverance towards long-term goals, and it's not talent. So for sake of time, I'll sum this up a bit briefly. As someone else pointed out already, that we need to encourage students to enable or to understand themselves within the growth mindset rather than the fixed mindset, which I'm probably preaching to the choir with the group that's here. But as they also pointed out, that includes us too, that we need to make sure that we're approaching these items with a growth mindset and providing the ability and the space for those students to grow. Sorry about my dog there. So one of the ways that I did this was having them pre-commit. I built into the process of brainstorming and writing for our essays those connections, where I asked them to define what their ultimate goal is, where I asked them to specify it, make it measurable, make it achievable and relevant. And we actually build this into our first essay. So it's no longer just about an essay over some topic that I've made up that I think is interesting or that I pulled from someone else's lesson plan. This is them writing an essay about themselves, connecting their goals to my classroom and creating a strategy to achieve that goal. So the writing has meaning. And then I tried to help them frame it using our course, identifying obstacles, and most importantly, that implementation intention. This last step I really found helped students, especially with the metacognition, because they didn't panic when they made a mistake. because they already had created a plan for what they were going to do if they did. And that actually has proved the most invaluable tool, even already this semester for me, that students are already falling back on their plan when they realize, oh, I missed this, or I didn't turn this in on time. And again, this is just pulling from UDL about recruiting interest, optimizing individual choice and autonomy, optimizing the relevance, value, and authenticity of the assignments. And just a brief shout out for those of us who sorry about that. One of the things that we do use, and what I've used for all those documents here, and we've committed to use on all the documents for our courses moving forward, is Tilt. So just a shout out to Tilt Higher Ed. If you have not heard of it, I encourage you to go take a look. And last, as I'm closing in on my time here, I like to share this analogy for why and how I build it the way we do, or why we're including these types of assignments. With this analogy, it's not mine, but every single time I've brought it up, people love it, so I keep bringing it up. Again, not mine. And that's that most of our students are coming in as the bricklayer on the left, and we want them to be the bricklayer on the right. And what our assignments need to do is to help them move that direction. All three of these people are doing the same thing, completing the same work, doing the same job, but the way they view it changes their motivation. It changes the likelihood of them sticking with it, and it changes how much it means to them. And the more we can get our students to a calling, the more likely they are going to be to succeed, the more likely they are going to be to graduate and to make more money. And just because I know that I'm in humanities, and a lot of my faculty that is STEM kind of gives me pushback that I'm being a little too touchy-feely. This is an example from a science class that I know of, where he phrased some of those exact same questions that I did, and that is, he starts the lesson with, how could the world be a better place? And then he has the students draw connections to what they're learning in school and what the student identify of how we could make the world a better place. And when he did that, it doubled the amount of time, sorry for that typo, the time they spent on studying for an upcoming exam. They worked harder on tedious math problems when given the option to watch entertaining videos instead, and in math and science classes. And they brought home better report card grades. Now, I don't know about you, but if I gave my students the opportunity to watch an entertaining video instead of listening to me, they would probably take the video. So I think that speaks to the power of creating meaning. And just to follow that up, on the left, this is not my information. That is information from Angela Duckworth's book and company, but it does show how that idea of purpose leads to better outcomes than pleasure over a longer period of their lifespan and their career span. And on the right there, I have an example of the thesis breakdown that they are writing for that first essay, just to show how it does actually come to fruition in a real way, where they're crafting this into real assignments. But I think that's all of my time. So.
Oh, thank you very much, Robert. And you did leave a couple of minutes for folks to ask questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring that here for a couple of seconds. If you have any questions for Professor Ladd. Okay, again, we appreciate your presentation, Robert, and we are on schedule and 1 minute ahead of schedule. And so we will proceed. We do have two teams, but they're not adjacent to each other from Columbia State Community College. The first one is a session entitled Engaging Faculty, Engaging Students, using OER for literature and composition. And we have 4 presenters. The team lead is Professor Judith Westley. So Judith, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Let me get this going. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Den. My team and I are creating an OER project for our college's literature-based composition course. And our presentation covers the importance of collaboration in our design process. So we want to provide some insights on the benefits of collaboration. My PowerPoint's not doing what I want it to do right now. There we go. We want to provide some insights on the benefits of collaboration and also some ideas for those of you who may want to collaborate on an OER project in the future. When the 4 of us began working together, we decided to embrace the concept of openness and collaboration in every aspect of the project. To us, the open in OER is not just a feature of the finished product. We see openness as an attitude, a way of relating to other people, and a tool for solving problems. So we want our entire department to see themselves as our partners in this project. And this is one of the ways that OER is different from the traditional textbook. Now this slide shows the Comp 2 description in our current catalog. Our resource includes original study questions and essay prompts and guides on how to teach particular texts that are developed with input from the rest of our faculty. A lot of people teach this course at our college. We wanted to create as many opportunities as possible for our colleagues to share with us their thoughts about the course. We held several focus groups with English instructors. We reached out to faculty individually. We also had many informal conversations with our colleagues and among ourselves. And from those conversations, we learned 2 important lessons about our college's cultural readiness for OER. Initially, we expected that people would be hesitant to use digital content, but that's actually not the case. Many instructors already provide, quote, free, unquote, links to students, but they do not always pay attention to copyright laws. Sometimes they feel compelled to help students out because they can't afford materials. Sometimes they want to provide materials that are not in the textbook. So having this OER course will help keep my colleagues out of the slammer. We also learned from the experiences of new instructors. Many recalled that early in their careers, more senior people didn't want to share teaching materials. And the lack of sharing was a barrier to entering the profession and developing as teachers. So having this OER resource will give instructors the support they need to serve our students to the best of their ability. And now I am turning things over to my colleague, Graham Harkness.
Hey, thanks so much, Judy. Go to the next slide. So in order to ascertain the needs and desires of colleagues within our department, we held a series of 4 focus groups hosted by a different member of the Comp 2 OER team. So the purpose for these focus groups was to gain insight into the curriculum and the development of assignments within our colleagues' English Composition 2 courses by creating a dialogue within the department with both full and part-time faculty. There has been a greater sense of clarity in the design and structure of the course. So we're building a resource that reflects the best teaching practices of our talented full-time and part-time English faculty. Can you go to the next slide? As the first member of my team to host a focus group, attendance from part and full-time faculty was pretty high. As the moderator, I fielded questions regarding instructional approach and composition 2. We had a lively discussion of grammar, MLA format and style, and aspects of pedagogy regarding essays that worked and needed some improvements. We also discovered that many faculty were teaching similar works of literature, and the most noted aspect of the literature was that it was primarily made up of works within the public domain. So honestly, it was a joy just to be able to talk about the merits of specific works of literature and what it was that made teaching those particular texts so invigorating. Can you go to the next slide, please? So from the outset of this initiative, it was and is our goal to maintain a sense of transparency in the development of this course and to sustain an open line of communication with our colleagues. While this course development is the effort of four, we believe that it is also important to receive feedback from our colleagues throughout the development process. While colleagues openly discussed their curriculum and assignments during focus groups, we incorporated a personal touch in reaching out to individual faculty. So each of us agreed to contact members of the faculty for reading lists and activities, lessons, assignments, just paper topics, any materials that they found to be the most successful. And by individually inviting colleagues to send materials, we received a greater response rate with numerous materials to use. Several focus group attendees sent us their course materials for possible inclusion in this OER course. So we want to include familiar items as well as new items, so faculty have a sense of familiarity with course materials, but can also adapt the course to their own needs. And one more slide, I think. So we've developed plans for collaborating on content, the overall structure of the OER Comp 2 course, and we are including familiar items as well as new items, so faculty has this greater variety of resources to use and make their own. And we are also coordinating with the Columbia State English 1010 OER team to make the English 1010, 1020 courses a bit more unified. And with that, I send it over to my next colleague, Nina Adele.
Thanks, Graham. Next slide, please. While developing and providing access to our OER resources and courses certainly our overarching current work, ultimately we know that the most important collaboration of all is with our students, for whom this endeavor has been taken on in the first place. Our team seeks to design this course and its bank of resources toward the goal of increased student engagement by asking them to partner with us. The OER initiative can provide active new doorways for students to enter this partnership. Next slide, please. We are providing many kinds of available texts, some readily available, others not necessarily as known or perhaps not as widely used. We want to engage and empower our students, meaning all those who will be receiving their instruction through the OER 1020 course, to follow our lead in uncovering beautiful literature and related critical essays and video or podcast presentations on their own. Materials that directly connect with our teaching and chosen texts and OER-based lessons, and materials that emerge from them. One of the best ways to do that is by incorporating lesson components which ask our students to explore, evaluate, and assess these related materials and document this work in their essays and short assignments. And the lessons may ask students to share this work with the class community, which increases exposure to the literature they uncover for all. We want to lead our students to materials which they may access, worthwhile contemporary materials their instructors may not be able to post or share within a course shell due to licensing requirements. And in doing so, we'll educate them about copyright and permissions useful for their future endeavors, just as we've had to educate ourselves during the OER course development project. Next slide. So now I'll talk very briefly about my focus group. It was the last of the 4 that we held. And during my group, our team shared some of the materials we already have under development with those colleagues in attendance. So our team's collaboration was evident in these, as we've agreed to a somewhat uniform presentation of our lessons, both to present a streamlined, accessible course of consistent quality, and also for the sake of visual appeal. In the focus group, we once again requested any additional materials from our very busy colleagues, because by seeing our work in progress, we knew that the OER concept would and will become more real and possible and worthwhile for all. And with that, I turn it over to my next colleague, Daniel Kelly.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Judy. I think I got the easiest portion of this presentation, so I have to tip my hat to my colleagues. Judy, if you could please advance to the next slide. So where do we go from here? Well, I suspect, like a lot of you, we will continue to search for additional resources, adapt other materials, develop our own materials for use in the course. We will continue to add to our local repository of OER, as well as the TBR OER repository. And so I guess a better question is, where do we not go from here? Next slide, please, Judy. Well, we might show up at your school. And I think some of your materials might show up at our school. We hope that some of the materials we develop, some of the lesson plans we produce, you'll find intriguing or insightful or useful, and you'll give them a try at some point in the semester. We will be collaborating in the true spirit of OER with other faculty across the state. Now, when I signed up for this project, I didn't know much about OER. I really just knew that it involved no textbook, or no purchasing of a paper textbook. I didn't realize there was so much development of materials, and there's so many possibilities to give, as much as we pull in and collect and take from what's already available. So that's an exciting part of this project, and we'll work from semester to semester on development. Next slide, please, Judy. From Tennessee, I suspect that some of our materials might make their way into schools across the nation. I like to think that in the not too distant future, there might be maybe a frustrated English professor in some windswept corner of Northeast Kansas who's trying to figure out how to enliven his discussion of Tony Cade Bombara's The Lesson, and maybe stumbles across my group activity or my essay plan, and just for a brief moment brightens that 1 week out of 16. That could be the romantic in me. But realistically, what we put together will, I assume, ultimately be available and accessible for adoption across the country. And that's really exciting to me. And it's exciting to think also that we will be combing through and coming across and adopting materials from our colleagues across the nation. Next slide, please, Judy. From there, well, who knows? This is quite a journey we've embarked upon. And the only thing I can say with certainty is that it does not stop here. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, teammates.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So team, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes.
Oh, terrific. We have a couple of minutes for questions.
Let's see.
It says in here, where will you publish the composition OER course, in OERC, Merlot, or some other platform? And this is a good, Danielle, I'm glad you mentioned the Tennessee repository that we're currently building. And that, although it is going to be housed on a TBR server, that is going to be for all Tennessee colleges and universities. The technical colleges, community colleges, TEQA, UT System, LGI, everyone is going to have the opportunity to participate, to upload and download and use this repository that we're just building that has come out of the affordability task force. And we're now naming that Tennessee Open Education. It's part of the greater umbrella of the work that everyone's doing in the state. And we are building that. Hopefully that repository is going to be ready for the OER grant project recipients to upload, as well as everyone else to use. So more news about that later. And thank you very much. I appreciate it. I love the Hogwarts slide. Yes, hopefully they'll be using your materials as well in a magical sense. And so we will move on. Again, I appreciate everyone sticking to the schedule. And our next team is from the northeast part of the state, Northeast State Community College, with the title Reclaiming the Past, a new take on Tennessee history. And I'll now turn it over to the team leader, Professor Tabitha Garman.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here. This has been a great seminar, and I'm really excited that we get to contribute to it in our own little way. As many of you have all pointed out, there are a myriad of wonderful reasons to adopt OERs. In the teaching of history, OERs have an added benefit. It affords us an opportunity to show historical events from a more inclusive perspective. History textbooks, as I'm sure you're aware, particularly those dealing with local and, in the case of our project, state history, are very limited, and they tend to stick almost exclusively to the great man, great event telling of history. Our project, it's called Reclaiming the Past, is using OERs and interviews to establish a database and a master course that will teach Tennessee history from a broader and more inclusive viewpoint. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Pagel, who is heading up our OER section, and he can give you some more information on that aspect of the project. Dr. Pagel?
Thank you, Tabitha. Am I showing my screen right now?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us today. We appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And like so many of our colleagues across the state have said, we have to give great thanks to our librarians and to our dean of the library, who is posted there on the bottom right of my screen, who hopefully is listening right now. He hasn't texted me yet, but I'm sure it's coming in soon. Chris Demas, thank you so much. He was kind enough to create a library resource page for us, which allowed us to start posting things and work collaboratively in this asynchronous environment. And so one of the first tasks we were tasked with, of course, was finding OER materials in a narrative form, a book, if you will, that would allow some type of continuity through the history. And so Chris, I, Colin, Tabitha, we've come up with two so far that we've found, among others, in the OER world. The first one, looking here, comes from the Tennessee Department of State, the Secretary of State's office, called the Blue Book. And in this Blue Book, they have compiled all of this information, both past and present. As you can read there, I put a description of what the Blue Book does for the state of Tennessee. But the great thing about this in its PDF format here is, one, it's downloadable. Two, it's also cuttable. And so I've found, with experience with other courses using an OER format, it's great for our students, for us to be able to cut and insert in weekly modules or monthly modules the OER material, so the student themselves do not have to struggle through the OER material in that way. And so this piece here, I think, will work in that capacity. It'll allow the cut capacity of the shared material for the instructor themselves to individualize. And this was a big part of our initiative here, to be able to provide to instructors who will subsequently teach Tennessee history at Northeast State the ability to have that flexibility and work with this material. So if in the future the instructor just solely wants to use the Tennessee Blue Book on its history, the instructor could easily go week by week through the Blue Book and move in that capacity. However, if the instructor is more inclined to using primary source materials and digging them out, let's say from the Civil War era in Tennessee, we have some great materials loaded in here, which we dove into the Tennessee Virtual Archives. And in the Tennessee Virtual Archives, we have them all linked out for the shareable material. And now, for Tabitha's idea to be more inclusive and to show a telling of history that's not necessarily what we would see in a Cengage textbook or something like that, we can look at things like the diary of Alicia Carter, I believe it was here I had written, Rachel Carter. So some of these diaries written from the Civil War era would be wonderful. They are transcribed as well for the readers, so the reader could or could not read through the original text. They can be made accessible for various readers. So we have all of that working for us from the Tennessee Virtual Archive as well. So I've created the course here with all the tabs and the help of Chris Demas and Tabitha in this structure, starting with Native American life and primary sources that we could find, all the way through the Constitution, statehood, Civil War era into the recent past now. And this is significant, and we use some scaffolding ourselves in creating this project through another OER resource that we found from our history department colleagues. And I think I saw David Toy on here earlier. Thank you, David, if you're listening right now, for sharing an electronic textbook published by Stanford University called The American Yawp. And in The American Yawp, if you get a chance, americanyawp.com, you'll see it's laid out so well in an electronic web-based digital format so the student can go through these chapters and comparatively look at Tennessee history versus what's happening in the broader American history at the time period. So using that scaffolding, we were able to look at Reconstruction in Tennessee, Gilded Age, Progressive Era in Tennessee, and what was happening in those times. Recently, our group had a meeting last week and we said, well, there's also a lot of other great resources out there that aren't necessarily OER, that might be copyrighted, that our library has, but would be wonderful to supplement a course. And so Tabitha came up with a great idea of creating a bibliography. Like we would in any academic pursuit, this bibliography will reflect works that are relevant to what we're doing now and that could supplement, as I previously said. So here are some of the important things for East Tennessee, those of us in the Eastern time zone today. You can see the Appalachian frontier, over mountain men, things like this become extremely important. And then we move on into things like Trials and Triumph essays in Tennessee African American history. So all of these resources could greatly supplement the course. They may be held in the Northeast State Library, they may be held in another library, but by giving our users of this database this information, we think it'll expand their course and their accessibility. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Colin Cox, who will tell us a little bit about the interviews that we're conducting.
Right. Hello. Hi, my name is Colin, and my responsibility for this project is to create a database of interviews that we will conduct with some of our students. My responsibilities include securing interviewees, securing students who will function as the interviewers, and part of how, and Professor Garman spoke about this earlier, that we want this course to offer, and this is language from our grant proposal, we want this course to offer a balanced narrative that emphasizes the contributions of underrepresented people who have been overlooked in, even omitted from standard Tennessee history texts and curricula. And in addition to the wonderful work that Michael has done, that's part of what these interviews will do. It will function as not just a supplement, but a necessary part of how we shape the narrative of Tennessee's history in this course. This is one of the reasons why, this is one of the reasons why we want this interview database to be malleable. We want to add to it as necessary. So we're thinking of this database as at least this first iteration of the database as simply that. It's just a first iteration. We hope to build on it. We hope to add to it as necessary. And as we assess the contributions, for the first iteration of the database, we are excited to have voices from the LGBTQ+ community, people of color who were involved in the civil rights movement in Tennessee, immigrant citizens, and essential workers. Again, thinking back to the language from our grant proposal, too often the sorts of voices, contributions to history that have been overlooked and omitted. And something that Professor Garman has spoken to us about is how she wants this course to be about Tennessee's history, obviously, but she wants it to be, and I think all of us working on this project would agree, we want this course to be about Tennessee's present. We want to know what it means to make Tennessee's history, to live it. And this interview database ultimately helps us accomplish that goal. It helps us communicate to our students, to faculty members who are interested, members of the community, what it means to live Tennessee's history, to create it. So that's in short what the interview database wants to do, what we want it to do. And again, I would just emphasize that what we will have when it's ready at the end of this project is simply a first iteration. It's something much like the history of Tennessee, as Professor Garman has taught me. It's something we are constantly making. It's not something that should remain stagnant or encased in amber. And something else that has been quite wonderful about this project, which I think you'll see reflected in the interview database, is just how cross-disciplinary this is. I am not a history professor. Excuse me, I am not a history professor. I teach in the English department, but we're receiving contributions from practically anyone and everyone. We have students involved in this project, so we're extremely excited about this database. And I think, Tabitha, that's it. So if there's any questions, we're happy to address those with the time remaining.
That is the beauty of the project, is it's while we're using it to form the Tennessee history class, it could be used by students anywhere. And as Chris Demas has been handing out the website, all of you can access it and use it. And that's the purpose of it. And once the interviews are uploaded to it, you'll be able to use those too in a broad spectrum of academic fields. It's applicable. Plus, in my little historian way, it's maintaining this history. We're holding on to all of this stuff, all of these perspectives and all of these ideas, so that when we think of Tennessee history, it's the broader view of Tennessee history. Any questions?
Well, thank you so much to the Northeast team. This sounds fascinating. And I just want to say it was Colin, were you the last, you're the one in the sweater there, right? In the glasses?
That is
Because
me.
I just
Hello.
want,
Hi.
yes, I just want to make sure everyone knows that because of my error, there are clones of me, Robert Den. Colin is not really Robert.
Oh, that is what that says.
Yes, and so I don't want to
can
take
see
credit
that.
for your brilliance, okay? But that's my fault. I had sent out my login to folks who used it, and that was my fault. And so I apologize to you, Colin, and the rest of
Oh, no, it's okay.
the
I didn't even
attendees.
notice it. So, but thank you though.
Yeah, I know very little of English, humanities, or history or anything. I have useless knowledge. So thank you very much for that. And we're again, well, we're a little ahead of schedule, so we might get to have lunch just a couple of minutes early. We have two more teams. The next one on the agenda is our second Columbia State Community College team. This one with the session entitled Adapting Composition for the 21st Century. And I'll now turn it over to the team lead, one of the presenters, Professor Christina Laux.
Thank you, Dr. Den. So my name is Christina Laux. I am the team lead for the Columbia State OER 1010 composition project. This has been a great learning lesson so far. So thank you for everyone who shared. I always have issues moving that. There we go. All right. So my team consists of my colleagues at Columbia State, Shelley Ganter, Associate English Professor, Colleen McCready, English Instructor, and then we have also partnered with our librarian, Ann Scott. She's been consulting with us, helping us with our development. We intend to house our OER on the Columbia State library site, just for ease of access for students and faculty. Of course, this is, we're working to make sure that everybody has access to this material. So when we started this project, my apologies. When we started this project, we were really looking at what do we need to do time-wise, what is best time-wise. So we looked at multiple OER sites. We looked at Merlot, we looked at the Lumen Learning Center, we looked at multiple sites and looked at multiple colleges also and universities to see how they housed their OER sites, how they worked with materials. And we were trying to decide between writing a text and adapting a text. And while we all love the idea of writing something someday, we are English people, we thought our needs would be better met by adapting a text. So we started out seeking texts that would work for our already existing English 1010 outcomes for both Columbia State and the TBR outcomes that we are all required to teach. The other important thing for us was to partner with our learning support text. We use the Hawks system for our learning support right now. Of course, that is always susceptible to change, but we were really looking for something to come alongside that text and be a strength for that. We decided to do the Bay College Rhetoric and Composition text. It is strictly text. There are no essays, so we went out searching for essays also. And we found some essays that I'll show you in a few minutes. 88 essays, actually, I believe is the title of the book. We found those to be able to include with our system. We were looking for interchangeable. We have, I'm sure like you all, a multitude of instructors who have been teaching for 30+ years and some who literally this is their first adjunct position out of college. And so we wanted to be able to help those who, just wanted a little bit from a textbook. And then we wanted to be able to assist the instructor who really leaned on the book and who really wanted to kind of bear into and use the examples and use the exercises until they kind of found their own way. And then, of course, we wanted to complement. We wanted, of course, to find something that complemented faculty, because again, many of us have our preferred methods of teaching. We've spent hours making PowerPoints, especially probably in this past year. Many of us have spent hours making PowerPoints and videos. So we didn't want to overtake, we didn't want to replace what people were teaching. We wanted to come alongside and just provide that second resource, third resource, fifth resource for them, of course, to be able to use. So we were looking to supplement instruction through texts and through our reservoir that we're building. So the books we're adapting, the Bay College Rhetoric and Composition, we each divided that up into parts, each of us taking a third. We're also writing chapters. We talked about how what we teach. One of us teaches a proposal, and we talked amongst our colleagues in the college and found that many of them teach a proposal. Many of us teach rhetorical devices, and then of course we wanted a chapter that combined rhetorical modes and provided essays and examples for students. Again, the 88 open essays, this is strictly essays. These are modern essays. This is a great source. I know so many of us have a hard time really trying to connect with our students and in the reading. And I don't know about you all, but I get so frustrated sometimes trying to find resources to be able to keep the interest of such a diverse group of students. And so these 88 open essays really is quite modern. Millennials and finance are some of the topics. Hollywood stereotyping, they use the latest Aladdin movie. Talk about that, and that's just a few years old. Social media discussions about bias, and there's a diverse selection of authors, topics, and categories. So we chose that again because the Bay College doesn't have any essays in it, so we wanted to be able to provide those resources for our colleagues. And then the Pocket Professor is a standard grammar textbook that we will adapt and modify. Of course, with the new MLA format coming out in April, we will all be modifying our lesson plans accordingly. And then finally, we're building a reservoir. And this is probably the thing that I am most excited about. We're partnering with our librarian, Ann Scott, in the John Finney Memorial Library to house an open educational resources reservoir that we hope will benefit the entire campus. Our goal for this is to create modules based on lessons that we teach: narrative, descriptive, argumentative. Of course, the APA and MLA formatting will also be in there, to make that accessible for people across the campus. And so, you know, if you're teaching a class and you've been teaching narrative and you want to refresh your lesson, you know, you could go to that folder, to that section, open it up. You might be able to find a lesson from me, a lesson from Colleen McCready, maybe an assignment from Shane Hall. You can find all of these different things inside this. So you can kind of read through it and say, all right, you know, I would really like to use this PowerPoint, but I'm going to make these changes. It kind of pulls it off. So we're partnering with our full-time and part-time faculty to create this module system that, again, we hope will be beneficial not just to the English department, but to the entire campus. And then, of course, this will all go into the TBR Commons with our texts that we modify for this purpose. So next, my colleague Colleen McCready is going to talk about the editing process that we're working through. And then after her, Shelley Ganter will discuss the movement to the online campus with our course. So Colleen.
Yeah, thanks. When we decided to adapt an OER textbook for our Composition 1 class, we knew we would have to write not only a few new chapters, but edit existing ones. Upon choosing the textbook to work with, we noticed a few areas that obviously were written by different people due to the lack of formality or the formality between the chapters. And one of our goals for our team was to make the book cohesive throughout. The team reached an agreement for what language and tone we wanted to convey throughout the book. And while existing chapters were divided among us, it was clear we were on the same page to keep the same verbiage in the same tone, and that we would all be reading the book fully a few times to make sure that it did have that continuity that we needed. Edits were just one of the steps of many towards making this book ADA compliant and accessible on numerous platforms. We will not only have this available as a PDF, but also as an ebook available for the numerous platforms of digital readers. But we'll also have it formatted in a print version, so students can get the print version for minimal cost if they choose. And with the use of the grant, we're able to defray this cost for at least the first year for students. One of the important factors we also agreed on was that the table of contents needed to be linkable to the actual chapters for easy maneuvering through the book, whether it was a PDF or an ebook. The same in the 88 open essays that we chose to use. They use hashtags in the book for every essay. So if you wanted your students to read an essay using pathos, you would just find the hashtag of hashtag pathos, and that is on every applicable essay. We're working with the list of hashtags to make it searchable. So when you click on the hashtag, it will automatically generate every essay in the book that uses that hashtag. And Shelley Ganter is now going to step in.
All right, I'm coming from my kids' old bedroom up under the roof. I hope you can hear me. I'm on a DSL line and sometimes fade in and out a little bit. So as my students well know, so I'll give it my best. Let me share my screen with you. I've got a little bit of a very sort of rudimentary slideshow here. All right. So what I'm talking about is how I plan to, or some of the benefits of using OER to revise an asynchronous online class. And so what I mean, not a hybrid, not a Zoom class, a fully online asynchronous class. We have several of these sections offered at Columbia State every semester, Comp 1, English 1010 sections. And one of the reasons that I was interested in this project was that there are problems that I've run into over the decades actually teaching online that I can address with using OER. The first one is that using OER makes it very easy to chunk material. So for example, here, if this is a hypothetical unit on process analysis or whatever, I can actually bring in to this unit just the one textbook chapter that I'm interested in having students read for that unit or module. I can also chunk it with other similar material. For example, a video, a quiz, an assignment, and this just kind of keeps everybody on the same page and up to speed. Of course, my students will also have the textbook as a whole available to them, which they can download or they can read online. Another thing that's really important to me and that helps, that I sort of struggle with every semester, whether I'm teaching online or in the traditional classroom, is that this approach gives me the chance to make my vocabulary and all of my different materials consistent and my descriptions of concepts consistent. So for example, we are using a fully modifiable textbook. We're adapting this fully modifiable textbook, and a lot of OER resources are fully editable, fully modifiable. So here, for example, the original writers of the textbook use the word exemplification for what I call illustration. And I'm always frustrated when I have to be at war with my textbook, either in class or online, saying, well, you know, your textbook calls it this, and we're going to call it this. And I know everybody who's ever used, say, this 3-step approach to writing about literature, and some people call it the cheeseburger approach, and some people call it the Oreo approach. This is a way, using OER, you can actually adapt your textbook to make sure that you are using the wording consistently that your students will understand. So here I can get rid of exemplification and I can use illustration if I know ahead of time how this course is going to be set up. Finally, you know, and most important, really for, you know, the underserved population and also for ADA compliance and so on, is the fact that the course textbooks can be available the very first day the class begins. So when my students sign on for the logon for the first time, here are links to each one of their textbooks. Not only does this make it easier for people to get up to speed from the very beginning, not only does it free us from excusing, you know, delays and late work and so on, but it also makes things a lot easier for students who are taking an online class because they have problems with transportation. Maybe they have responsibilities at home that keep them there. Maybe they have ADA compliance, you know, they need ADA compliant materials or so and so on. And it also makes it easier for us as instructors because we don't have to have our textbooks ordered weeks ahead of time. They don't have to have come into the bookstore. We don't have to worry about getting them to adjunct faculty and so on. And it makes it easier to substitute. So, you know, we talk a lot about academic freedom, especially with respect to online classes, which often have master courses that we're constrained to teach. This allows maybe the introduction of some alternative modules, for example, some alternative lessons, even an alternative text or supplementary reader, if that's what a faculty member wants to use. So that's my little practical issues PowerPoint. And that's it for me.
And that's it for us. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you very much to the Second Columbia State team. Are there any questions directly? I have one here from Yvonne. If you edit the book, is it unique to your class or will it be edited for all sections? I guess that is directed toward this team.
The book we're editing is ideal for the entire department, for the entire 1010. Of course, as Shelley was saying, you know, it would be certainly easier, you know, if you were doing an online course and you had some language issues, you could adapt that. You could pull it down out of the cloud adapt it and then put it back up into your shell yourself. So, but of course, you know, depending on what your department requires and how all that falls into line, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. So.
And I must say, the moderator is never supposed to interject any kind of qualification or anything, but I just got to say I love the reservoir idea. That's super, especially that that title, you know, that word, that descriptor. Any other questions before we move on to our last, but finally not least, presentation team? Okay. And bringing us to a close is Pellissippi State Community College with a session title, Open Up to OER at Pellissippi State Community College. And I will turn over our last session, our last 15 minutes to Professor Allen.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Den, and thank you everyone for sticking it out to the end. My name is Antia Allen, and today I'm joined by my team members, Edward Garnes and Tracy Reese. And we're going to talk to you about our project that's related to the Psych 1030 Introduction to Psychology course. We had several goals for our project, but the largest goal was to close some equity gaps that we noticed at our institution. And we did that by customizing a textbook and some other materials, and also creating some student and instructor resources. And then we're going to end our presentation by talking about sustainability. So kind of like next steps after the project ends, how can we continue this work of OER at our institution? So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Reese, who's going to talk about her aspects of this project. Tracy?
Yep. All right. Thank you all again for being here and sticking it out. I'll be very frank. I was slow to get on the OER train. I was hesitant, for all the callers that had gone and talked about all the barriers and the concerns. I had a lot of those. And this grant gave us an opportunity to really address some of those issues and do it where it wasn't by myself, it was with the team. So it took a lot of the anxiety off. And so when we looked at our equity gaps, this became an opportunity to infuse what we're working on with our ATD coaches, specifically in my work with our general education strategy team, and bring that into psychology and the intro to psych class. And so we are focusing on building a strategy bank of reading strategy interventions for the college. And so what we did with this OER text is we were able to implement kind of reading strategies within that. We're also able to then take in new chapters for more inclusivity and adjust chapter content and update it for more inclusivity. And then the ease of using the Creative Commons, for example, and incorporating updated materials and images has been wonderful. Slide. So first with the reading strategies, one of the things that we were looking to do was build reading strategy interventions into the textbook. And so there'll be a before you read section at the beginning of the text, and then a blurb for each chapter. And so before you read is just going to introduce them and give them the purpose for why this is important, and kind of some tips and highlights. So for example, I know it's hard to read, it's a busy slide, but this first sentence of the second paragraph just says, previewing a chapter before you read is a great way to get your bearings and maximize your time and your learning. And so it also links to a video on some of the reading strategies, specifically what we're going to be using in this text called Golden Lines, which are 1 to 2 lines where students can pull out something that really resonates with them, that really applies to them, and it strikes a chord with them. Not necessarily the most important thing. The whole idea with this is getting students to connect psychology to their own life, and being able to connect their reading to what they're passionate about and what they're interested in. And so there'll be this before you read. And then next slide. And then at the end of each chapter, there will be a golden line exercise where it'll be built right in, and ideally we'll link it through Brightspace where they can just click and it'll take them to an assignment where they can complete this golden line exercise, where they'll write 1 to 2 sentences for each golden line. And they'll probably do, you know, between 5 and 7, and they'll indicate the golden line, the page, but also why it's a golden line for them. Like, why was it applicable for them, or why did they gravitate towards this particular part of the reading? And then it gives them the video again to kind of remind them, like, this is what it is that they're doing. And it gives them an example for the chapter. Like, each specific chapter will have a specific example for what they're looking to do. And so they pull out the reading, they're able to apply it, and they're able to share it. And we can use those on a discussion forum to really engage with the textbook. There's a lot of possibilities and opportunities here. Slide. And then we also, when we were looking at the OER for psychology, the gender and sexuality content was buried in another chapter, and we weren't really happy with that. It was very outdated, and we just thought, you know, this is an opportunity to really make a difference and update this information. It's a topic that students really are hungry to learn about. So we are pulling that content out of the original chapter and making a whole new chapter on gender and sexuality. And so within that new chapter, we're editing and we're including updated information. Most of the sources that I had noticed they're about 10 years old, and there's been a lot of research in gender and sexuality in the last 10 years. And so I was able to identify Cornell University has a plethora of research articles all pulled into one place. And so I'm able to hyperlink to their source and discuss, for example, if you can kind of see the top picture, the blurb talks about conversion therapy and the detriments of that practice. And so we can update that content. We also can improve inclusivity. The pictures were oftentimes not just outdated, but they had negative connotations. And so the picture here with the 2 men together, that's an updated image from the Creative Commons. And it's replacing one that was of a male couple that were like in camouflage and military, holding hands. And that brought a lot of, like I said, negative connotations. And so we can change out those images, the pictures and the graphs very easily. There's quite a bit on the Creative Commons. I was pleasantly surprised. And then also, because this topic and a lot of topics in psychology can be triggers for students, I wanted to put resources for them to be able to get help if they need to. So I've inserted a Get Help Now section. It'll be like a spotlight section for suicide prevention in this chapter. And then we can infuse them into other chapters where it might be pertinent, where I've linked to the Trevor Project, which is a very popular and widely used LGBTQ website that has great suicide prevention aspects for them. And then the Suicide Prevention Network, and as well as the web link and the phone number for students to call if they are experiencing any kind of suicide ideation. And so we're, again, following up with reading intervention strategies to help bridge those equity gaps, more inclusivity, and help and engagement along the way. And I will turn it over to, it looks like Ed Garnes. Yep, Dr. Garnes is next.
All right, thank you. I got to shout out librarians. My mother is an award-winning librarian, so that's probably why I'm the subject matter expert for diversity, equity, and multicultural site. I think when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to, in our discipline of psychology, be very real about where you're starting. A lot of the historical critiques on psychology and from some of our students is that the discipline is very whitewashed, it's oppressive. Historically has been used to confer dominance over groups and also to be an authority on who's intelligent, who's not intelligent. You'll see gender bias within psychology textbooks, especially at the intro to psych level. More specifically, a gender bias towards the theories of white men. You won't see a lot of religious diversity or diversity depicting disability status. And there also is underlying bias on what theories are valid in our particular discipline based on the power and privilege. So we operate from a position of incorporating scholars like Dara Wing Su, who talks about the necessity of multicultural competence and not only looking at behavior, but also mental process. So what does that look like in real time? So it's incorporating when you're talking about the intro section on psychology, including my mentor who trained me, the late great Dr. Joe White, who founded the discipline of Black psychology from all of the failings of what he felt our discipline in APA was doing not only to students, but to the discipline as a whole. It also might mean incorporating theories like from Dr. Alfie Breland, a Black woman who studies suicidality and also racialized trauma and healing. And there's three major points in looking at this multicultural perspective and the resources that we're using. You have to, number one, prioritize equity in real time. You have to live it. You have to not just have it as an intellectual exercise, but you have to incorporate it. So today we did a section on memory, right? So I incorporated the research of Eberhard, who is from Stanford University, who won the MacArthur Genius Award, and talked about how she talks about culture and how social conditioning influences not only visual processing, but memory. And it's funny because Dr. Hunter talked about this bias and someone mentioning their 5-year-old thinking that someone would rob them. That actual example is Dr. Eberhard from Stanford. She has a book about bias and implicit bias where she gives that example of her 5-year-old viewing Black men as robbers. Secondly, we have to look at ourselves as being individuals that are ushering students into a discipline. And when you're ushering them into a discipline of psychology, when they don't necessarily see themselves, it becomes incumbent upon you to give them human recognition. We know as therapists and also as people in the psych world, human recognition is a fundamental developmental concept. So you're ushering students in a discipline, so they need to see themselves reflected in your exercises and curriculum. And third, systemic change. Systemic change, you get rid of issues. So your representation in your class, or your examples, your exercises, your videos, the incorporation of social media to deal with the new generation of millennials has to also reflect the systemic changes that you want to see in society and also in the discipline. I will pass it on to Dr. Allen. Sorry for the
I went to lunch.
Yeah, sorry for the delayed intro.
Thank you, Ed. So connected to what Tracy and Ed just discussed, I wanted to show an image of how you can make those changes in your courses. So not only did we customize the textbook and develop these student and instructor resources, also within Brightspace, you're able to change those images that appear when your students see their courses. And so these are actual like free stock images. I actually found these through the Community College Consortium OER. So shout out to CCC OER. They are awesome. If you're not already, please join their listserv. They always have such great resources. So this comes from two different links. One, all go plus size, another one disabled and here. And so our students get to see themselves when they log on to Brightspace. They get to see people who look like them, and representation truly matters when we talk about diversity and inclusiveness. And something else that our institution has been focusing on for quite a while is social belonging. And the best way that we felt like we could include that into our project was through our activities. And the three of us all use a lot of engagement activities. And so what we've done is we've created chapter by chapter activities that can be used by instructors, and they don't have to use them as is. They can modify them. As we know, some people are asynchronous, some people are synchronous, teaching on Zoom or Teams, and some people are face-to-face. And so all of these activities that we are providing, again, can be used as is or can be adapted. So you're going to see discussion questions that are varied. So not the same discussion question each week. You can have some that may actually allow students to work in pairs, even though they're asynchronous. You're going to see them being able to use different tools outside of Brightspace. For example, I have my students create infographics using Canva. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, or some things that you can do, some discussion questions you can do using Flipgrid, which is a video tool for discussions. So again, like allowing them to collaborate and feel more connected to each other, to their professors, and also to the content in the institution. And lastly, to wrap up, this was probably for me the most important, which is sustainability. Like when this project ends, we all don't want it to just end. Like we want to see OER continue. So at the start of the semester, we hosted a faculty development workshop with another team, another grant team at our institution, where we talked about what OER is, what are some benefits of it? What are some I guess things that cause people to hesitate before possibly adopting OER. And we discussed our projects and what we were doing. And so we're going to have another faculty development session in April, except when we do that one, we are going to be co-facilitating with our librarians to show that those are the real experts of OER, right? Like those are the ones who you should be going to, we should all be going to when we need assistance with OER. So what you are seeing now is actually the landing page for our library's OER page. I've created one as well with the help of our instructional designer. And that's located on the Pellissippi Academic Center for Excellence OER page, which anyone can access. And the link is here, and I'm happy to share these slides with anyone. And again, just like showing that we want to make people know that the library is going to be involved, and they're the ones that we're going to pass the torch to as it relates to OER. Thank you. We're at 1:30.
Well, yes, Antia, and it's I'm going to give you all the credit for this whole thing going off without a hitch. I appreciate it. Oh, one question I have for you: the workshop that you said is coming up, is that going to be for everyone in the universe or just the Pellissippi?
It's a Pellissippi workshop, but hey, if you want to join us, come on
Hey,
out.
well, someday. Now, before we all go to lunch, I really need to make sure everyone is aware that the arrangement and the planning and the idea for this OEW week in Tennessee is Rachel Fleming. She's on here. Rachel, a librarian at UTC. Would you say hello to everyone, please?
Hello, everyone. It was so wonderful to hear about all of these projects and see so many people talking about open education and OER projects. It's been really so wonderful putting together this whole week of programming. We've got one more tomorrow, so hope to see you there as well.
Yes, and thank you, Rachel. This wouldn't have happened without you. I'm just a moderator. I'm just a voice. That's all. We have our experts. Thank you so much to the 8 teams who presented and all of our attendees. Rachel, how will the slide decks and the recordings be made available to everyone who wants them?
Recordings of the sessions are going to be sent out to all registrants, and if presenters provide their organizers with slide decks, I can include those along with the recordings.
Okay, and so those slide decks should come for these 8 teams to me, and then I will funnel them to you?
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll do it. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy this hopefully sunny weather if you're seeing the same thing out your window that I am.